In 18th century France, eating a potato could ruin your reputation. In parts of Germany, people called it the devil's tuber. In France, it was whispered about as a witch's plant, something pulled from cursed soil, something unfit for Christians, something better suited for pigs than people. What you will now uncover is the story of how one prisoner, a military pharmacist captured during war, transformed a banned-feared devil's root into a national staple, and his name was Antoine-Augustin Parmentier. When the potato first arrived in Europe in the 1500s from the Andes Mountains of South America, it did not receive a hero's welcome. It arrived as a stranger. It grew underground, and above all, it wasn't mentioned in the Bible, and it looked suspicious. The plant belonged to the nightshade family, Solanum tuberosum. That meant it was related to plants Europeans already feared: henbane, mandrake, thornapple, and deadly nightshade. Many of these were toxic, some were hallucinogenic, some were lethal. They were often called witch plants. So when Europeans saw this knobby, dirt-covered tuber growing beneath the soil, they didn't see food. They saw danger. In France especially, cuisine was deeply tied to religion and social hierarchy. Orchard fruits were refined, game birds were noble, wheat bread was sacred. But anything pulled from what some clergy called the devil's dirt, like onions, carrots, and especially potatoes, was associated with peasants and animals. The potato's blotchy skin didn't help its reputation. Some believed it caused leprosy. Others claimed it spread disease simply because it looked diseased. By 1748, the French Parliament formally restricted the cultivation of potatoes for human consumption, declaring them harmful. A crop that could grow in harsh soil, banned. A plant that could prevent starvation, rejected. The irony was that while elites mocked it, peasants quietly relied on it in rural areas. It was cheap, it was filling, it grew where wheat failed. But no one with influence had publicly defended it. Not yet. But that was about to change because of war. In 1756, Europe plunged into a massive global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. France fought Prussia, Britain fought France. Empires clashed across continents. Among the French soldiers captured by Prussian forces was a young military pharmacist named Antoine-Augustin Parmentier. He was taken prisoner multiple times, and in captivity, he was fed a diet many Frenchmen considered degrading: potatoes. Day after day, potatoes. Boiled, plain, simple. Back in France, this would have been seen as punishment. But something unexpected happened. Parmentier didn't die. He didn't develop leprosy. He didn't fall into madness from poison. He survived. Not only survived, but he remained healthy. As a trained pharmacist, Parmentier began observing, measuring, thinking scientifically. If potatoes were truly harmful, why were prisoners living on them? Why were Prussian soldiers strong and well-fed? Why was this crop sustaining entire populations in parts of Europe? Captivity gave him something more powerful than rumor. It gave him evidence. And when he was finally released and returned to France, he brought back more than memories of war. He brought back a mission. Back home, Parmentier began formally studying the potato, not as a peasant's crop, but as a scientific subject. He analyzed its nutritional value. What he found directly challenged French prejudice. Potatoes were rich in carbohydrates, a reliable source of energy. They contained potassium. They provided vitamin C, crucial for preventing scurvy. And that mattered enormously in the 18th century. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, devastated soldiers and sailors. Wheat alone couldn't prevent it. But potatoes could. Even more impressive was the yield. Compared to wheat, potatoes produced significantly more calories per acre. They could grow in poor soil. They tolerated harsh conditions. And unlike grain fields waving in the open air, potatoes grew underground, hidden. That meant invading armies couldn't easily burn or loot them. For a country prone to war and famine, that was revolutionary. And famine was not theoretical. By the late 1700s, France was suffering repeated crop failures, bad weather, outdated farming techniques, dependence on wheat, bread shortages. When wheat failed, people starved. Bread riots became common. The nation was hungry, literally and politically. France needed a solution, and Parmentier believed he had one. But there was a problem. Science alone would not defeat superstition. Parmentier understood something modern marketers know very well. Facts don't change culture, perception does. So he didn't just publish research, he launched a campaign. That's where he wrote pro-potato pamphlets. He entered academic competitions and won recognition for demonstrating how potatoes could treat dysentery and substitute for flour. He reframed the potato not as peasant food but as innovation. Then he aimed higher. Parmentier hosted elaborate dinners in Paris where every dish featured potatoes, potato bread, potato soups, and even potato desserts. His guests weren't farmers, they were scientists, aristocrats, influencers of their time. He needed the elite to legitimize the crop, and he succeeded in capturing royal attention. King Louis XVI reportedly supported agricultural experimentation and granted Parmentier land to cultivate potatoes near Paris. Parmentier even gifted potato blossoms to Queen Marie Antoinette, who wore the flowers in her hair. The king supposedly wore them in his lapel. Potatoes were no longer dirty, they were fashionable. But Parmentier knew something else. Winning the aristocracy wasn't enough. The working class, who had been taught to despise potatoes, needed persuasion too. So he staged one of history's cleverest marketing stunts. When granted fields near Paris, about 54 acres, Parmentier had the potato crops guarded heavily during the day, but at night, the guards conveniently disappeared. Locals assumed the crop must be valuable. Why else guard it? Curiosity replaced suspicion. People began sneaking in at night to steal the plants. They replanted them in their own gardens. Parmentier had turned exclusivity into demand. The potato spread not through force, but through intrigue. Gradually, the stigma began to fade. Not because people suddenly loved potatoes, but because reality forced them to reconsider. Scientific studies proved the crop was safe. Royal support made it respectable. Clever promotion made it interesting. And most importantly, hunger made it necessary. As France moved closer to the crisis that would erupt into the French Revolution, food shortages became more severe. Wheat harvests failed again and again, and when wheat failed, bread, the country's main food, quickly disappeared. But potatoes kept growing. They survived in poor soil. They produced more food per acre than grain. And because they grew underground, they were harder to destroy during wars or harsh weather. By the early 19th century, the change was clear. The crop once mocked as animal feed was no longer rejected, it was relied upon. It fed cities, supported armies, and helped reduce the risk of famine, quietly becoming one of the most important foods in France. Over time, it became woven into French cuisine, in soups, gratins, and eventually even fries, though their cultural evolution involved neighboring Belgium. Parmentier himself became widely respected as an agronomist and public health advocate. Today in Paris, there are streets, statues, and even dishes named after him, like Hachis Parmentier, a French version of shepherd's pie. The man who once survived on prison rations had reshaped a nation's diet. Think about the irony. A plant once condemned as unchristian, a crop feared as a source of disease, a so-called witch plant pulled from soil people believed was cursed, and yet all it took to change that story was one prisoner who refused to accept tradition without evidence, and a marketer clever enough to guard fields by day while quietly allowing them to be stolen at night.